Hi everybody, ciao a tutti, and welcome to this session, a short session that would like to be an introduction to the magic word of Bicep. If you are here, you are probably working with ARM templates to deploy your Azure SQL resources, and you want to improve your experience, and Bicep is here for that. Okay, let's have a quick overview of what's Bicep. Well, it's a new domain-specific language for ARM deployments. It was introduced by Microsoft as an open source project to improve your authoring experience, and it inherits all the pros of ARM templates when compared to other third-party tools for infrastructure as code on Azure. And it also tries to address all the complexities you may face while working with the JSON syntax with the ARM templates. For example, Bicep introduces a more readable syntax, and that is easier to be read inside your scripts, and improve the reusability of your code by using a modular approach. Having said that, it doesn't intend to replace the JSON files, because Bicep acts as a transpiler for JSON file. You author Bicep files, then through a console application, you convert them into ARM templates, and then the ARM backend is still working with the ARM templates. This leads us to a win-win situation where we can reuse all our existing ARM templates knowledge, while on the Microsoft side, they were able to quickly introduce Bicep because they didn't have to make huge changes to resource provider to adapt them for Bicep. Now, let me show you some Bicep files. But before starting, let's go to some requirements for starting in this world. First of all, you need the Bicep CLI, the console application. This offers you a couple of commands, Bicep build and Bicep decompile, that permits you to convert a Bicep file into a JSON file and vice versa. Then you need a development environment, and here my advice is to use VS Code, since with VS Code you can leverage the official Bicep extension that brings you code completion, snippets, IntelliSense, validation on the fly, and makes your experience with the Bicep files authoring very comfortable. Now, let's have a look at the representation of the template we will look at today. We have a simple template that provisions a logical server and its related database. The peculiarity of this template is that it accepts parameters that govern the tiering of our Azure SQL database, switching from S0 or S3, depending on the values of the parameter. Now, let's jump into the code, and here you can see everything. Well, I usually use this demo with an empty Bicep file and show how to convert the ARM syntax on the fly into the corresponding Bicep syntax. But today we don't have enough time to do this. So I'm showing you the final result of the translation, and I'll try to highlight the main points that go for Bicep. Now, as you can clearly see, the JSON ARM syntax you can see here on the left is way more complex than the Bicep representation on the right. To achieve the same result, you have to spend about 70 lines of code in ARM templates, while with Bicep you can stop at 40, and you achieve the same result. Then with Bicep file, you don't have to follow a rigid structure as with ARM templates, because, for example, you don't have to define a parameter section or a variable section and so on. You can, in Bicep, you can define parameters, variable, resources, output, wherever you want inside your scripts. Then parameters and variable can be declared in a single line of code, and then you can customize parameters with modifiers that permits you to achieve the same complex configuration you can obtain in ARM templates. When it comes to retrieve the value of a parameter or a variable, you simply have to recall the name of the entity you are working with. And it's quite different from the ARM template representation when you have where you have to use a parameters function or a variable function depending on the kind of entity you are working with. Then inside variables, properties, and so on, you can use static values, as well as you can reuse the same exact JSON function syntax that you are used to work with in JSON files. Here you can see an example. You can just cut and paste this stuff and in the Bicep file, and it works like a charm. On the other side, in Bicep, you can use improved syntax for some specific cases. And for example, here, you can see that I converted an existing concatenation function to the corresponding string interpolation feature in Bicep. You achieve the same result with a simpler syntax. And here again, I translated the conditional function that determine the size, the tier of our Azure SQL database with the native ternary operator in Bicep. Same result, easier syntax, less characters to be inputted. Now, let's go with resources. To define a resource in Bicep, you have to declare the resource keyword followed by a symbolic name. Then you have to specify its resource type as well as the API version that determine the kind of resource you are creating. As you can see here, this stuff can be easily retrieved via the extension in real time. You simply have to type some characters of the resource type you are creating, and it retrieves the values from you from the REST API of the resource provider. And inside the curly brace of the resources, you have to specify the same exact properties you used inside the ARM templates. So it's really easy for you to start working with Bicep. You can reuse all your existing competencies, and you mainly have to deal with code decoration. Another advantage of having a symbolic name for each resource is that you can reuse it to retrieve properties of an already deployed resource. Here, on the ARM template side, you can see I'm using the reference and the resource ID function to retrieve the fully qualified domain name of my logical server to output it for usage externally. And to achieve the same result on the Bicep file, I simply have to use the symbolic name of the resource, and then I can browse the properties collection to retrieve the property I want. And here, again, for the symbolic name, if you use the symbolic name of a resource inside another resource, you are leveraging implicit dependency management. So by specifying this syntax, this means that your Azure SQL database depends upon its parent logical server, and you can avoid specifying the depends on keyword that you can see here in the ARM template. Now, when you're ready with your authoring phase, you can just launch your Bicep build command with the CLI, and you can obtain a JSON file that you can easily compare with your starting point. And apart from some letter casing issues, you can see here, the result is the same. So you can push this file to your commonly used deployment system. Now, as for now, Bicep is in version 0.4 and is production ready and fully supported for your usage. You have a full feature parity with JSON ARM, so you can start today translating your ARM templates in the corresponding Bicep file. Well, it was quite hard to shrink all this stuff in 10 minutes, so I leave you with some contents, the learning path for Bicep, as well as the demo repository that contains the code I show you, so you can have a look at it later. And grazie. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you to Ben and William. And I'll be happy to answer your question offline. Feel free to reach me if you have any clarification.